Well, hi, I'm Julie Gunderson. I am a developer advocate for AWS.
And I'm Mandi Walls. I am a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. We used to work together at PagerDuty. Then she left me and went to Gremlin and is now at AWS.
Yeah, in Gremlin, we focused a lot on chaos engineering, and PagerDuty, we focused a lot on best practices, and, well, AWS, we focus on everything. But we're really excited to be here with you today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about SLOs and chaos engineering, which now that all the screens are fixed, that kind of takes my little joke away.
We had enough chaos, so we figured it out.
We did.
All good.
But one of the things that we talk about when we talk about SLOs, or when we talk about the practice of chaos engineering, is thinking about our customer experience. And the customer experience can really be different for whatever it is that your product is. Is it an internal customer experience or an external customer experience? And I want to kick us off with a little bit of a personal story. So Lego, they were releasing the Lego DeLorean. I was so excited about this Lego. I'm an enthusiast. I have all of the Legos, and I'd been waiting for this to go on sale. I was so excited. I was sitting at my computer like 2 hours before it was going to go available, clicking and clicking and clicking. Finally, at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Lego DeLorean became available on the website. And I was super excited to add it to my cart and get the payment made so that I could get my one DeLorean that you were allowed. And when I went to click the button, my card was declined. And I knew I had enough money, so I quickly pull out my phone and I go to my mobile banking app, and this is what I got. I caught them in a bad state. I needed my Lego. This was very important. This was my customer experience. So I went back, entered in a new card, but unfortunately, the Lego DeLorean was already on back order. All because I caught my bank in a bad state. Notice there's no link, there's no go here, there's no explanation, just a bad state. So when we talk about things like that, we want to think about the customer experience.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we talk about at PagerDuty is what we call full service ownership. So we're talking about sort of the end-to-end customer experience with what it means for those of us who are writing the applications, what our responsibility is to the business, to the users, for their good experience, and how those things sort of progress, and how to sort of manage them, right? So we talk about sort of preserving the reliability, working on the resiliency of our services based on what the users expect from us. So we're looking at, we've got our stuff, we're getting ready to be put into production, and we know what happens when things go to production. Something's going to go wrong. It's not a period of if something goes wrong. It's thinking about when something goes wrong and being prepared for that. Part of launching into production, whether your customers or your users are internal to your organization and you're like an internal service department, or it's actually part of like your revenue flow and people are going to give you money for the stuff that you're building. They're your customers and you want to preserve their experience and have a good experience for them. So thinking about what smart teams are doing, right? What folks who are looking to preserve not only the reliability of their technical systems, but also then the reliability of their human systems is, sort of forward-looking through all of those things. And that's what we are sort of focusing on, is making sure that everybody who is part of that whole ecosystem is in a good state. So we're going to start at the beginning. We'll set some baselines and some vocabulary. Some of the other sessions have already talked about a couple of those, so we won't belabor them, but we'll just try to, get started at the beginning. So I'm only going to mention SLAs here because we are not lawyers. SLAs are the domain of lawyers, right? Like people with legal degrees in whatever country you're doing business in is where your SLAs get to, right? And this is a snippet from PagerDuty's current SLA. It's available on our website. It's a contractual agreement with the customer. And if things go wrong, you might owe them chargebacks, or you might owe them credits, or there might be other lawyers involved, and there's like all this potentially bad things happen there. But we're going to talk about the things that we promise to each other and to ourselves, right? So without the lawyers involved, this is all the tech people's contracts, right? So we have a couple of components that we're now looking at, right? And one of them is what we call a service level indicator, and the other is a service level objective. And our indicators are sort of the metrics that we are going to judge ourselves by. These are the things that are important to our customers so that they think, hey, you know what? This is a good experience. It's fast. Things load. The thing that I want is there when I want it. And then we set our objectives based on what the users like. Users like a fast thing. We're going to say, we're going to promise we have the fast thing X% of the time. And that's how we build our internal benchmarks and our internal promises to each other for how we build our services and the reliability of those.
And one of the things that we want to think about when we're building our services is systems are complex. So if you look at what systems looked like 10 years ago or even 5 years ago compared to what they look like today, they are so complex and they're distributed. And not only are our systems distributed, but our human systems are distributed as well. We saw that during the pandemic when people worked at home. We weren't in an office. We weren't just talking to each other. If something was going wrong with one of our internal systems, I couldn't go over to Mandi's desk and be like, hey, yo, what's going on? What's going on?
I'm not there.
Yeah, so we had to think about the complexity of our systems and what that really relates to when it comes to working together. And so also, just to let you know, we can't see the slides down here most of the time. So if you catch me looking over here, it's so that I know what slide we're on and talking about. But when we talk about systems, one of the things we talk about are outages. So who here has experienced an outage? Right? Can you think about what that cost you, or maybe even what that cost your organization? Because outages are costly. And, we've been talking a lot about Dolly today, and I made some pictures with Dolly. So if who went to Patrick's talk? All right, so there's a little bit of AI. Actually, there's been a lot of talk about Dolly and ChatGPT at the conference today. But SLAs and chargebacks, we want to think about that and the fact that downtime costs us money, right? You can talk to your accounting team. You can talk to your sales team. And when there's downtime, or when there's downtime that hits the news, that costs you a lot of money in your organization. But you also want to think about your customers. What is that experience like for them? Are they frustrated? Can they buy their Lego? Or are they just sitting there clicking, and then all of a sudden they can't get what they want? Downtime, you also want to think about each other and our coworkers. What is the amount of stress to you and to the people? Because people do not want to work at organizations that are on fire. And what happens is the more stressed out engineers become, then they leave, and then that puts more pressure on the rest of the team, and it's this vicious cycle of burnout. So that's one of the things that we'll talk about when we practice chaos engineering, is how we avoid some of this downtime. And additionally, there's the reputational cost when your service is down. So one of the first talks I went to at a conference in 2014, Ben Rockwood from Chef at that time, he was talking about how when a system went down, Congress would eventually get involved. When Facebook went down, it would make national news. But now think about it. When a system goes down, Congress gets involved in the United States. I don't know, does your government get involved here when technical systems go down?
They have better things to do.
Yeah, they do in the United States, and they're starting to get really involved with the technical systems and how can we regulate and how can we prevent these things. So outages cost a lot more than just money. There's reputation, there's potential government regulation. So these are all the things that we want to take into consideration.
Yeah, so the other part that we talk about when we've got our SLIs, we have our indicators, we set our objectives. We're going to talk about a little bit about the math. It's not going to be deep math, but we'll talk a bit about the math and how we think about those. And then we have what's left over, like the little bit of time that we're allowed to be sort of out of tolerance, because things are going to happen. So we want to give ourselves some grace, right? I know folks like to talk about 5 nines, and I have a huge rant about 5 nines that I'll spare you, but like thinking about how much wiggle room you have in some amount of time is what we call an error budget. Are folks using error budgets? Are you working with that concept yet? So giving yourself a little bit of time to say, okay, this is our promise to our customers. 95% of the time, things are going to be amazing. So 5% of the time, we understand that in production, weird things are going to happen. So we have the little bit of time that's left over. But you can see from the pie chart that like you can barely see the yellow part. Like that's not a whole lot of time to give yourself if things break or you need to do some other kind of work. But it gives you some perspective on what the goals look like from that part of it. So.
And it's important to have that time too, because if you are expected to be up 100% of the time, that's just unrealistic. And what do we do with unrealistic goals? We ignore them. They're not, they just aren't something we strive towards, or we burn out all of our engineers and hopes and dreams that we're going to achieve something that just isn't possible.
Yeah, so this is the 5 nines. You can see here, like 99.999% of the time. Who's heard of this before, right? Like there's companies named this, right? This came from copper telephone, right? So you pick up an old telephone. Most of you are younger than me. So have you even seen a POTS telephone? Like you pick up the old plastic phone and there's a dial tone there. And that's where this came from. When we get to the internet though, it's not close. Telephone is less than 2 miles from where you're picking up the dial tone. So when we're thinking about the internet, there's all kinds of crazy business in the middle. So I know that there's still a lot of companies that think about, oh, we want 5 nines to the front end, but you're going to do a lot more work in the middle to cache things and to protect yourself so that your teams aren't being burnt out trying to meet these goals that were set for a completely different set of technologies in the 1970s, right? This is old stuff. Copper wires, regular switched networks, right? So yeah, that's a bit of my rant about 5 nines. So if you're not meeting 5 nines, it's okay. Like we know that the internet was not built for that kind of reliability. So we do a lot more work to protect ourselves from giving everybody that trauma on these unreachable goals.
Well, and we also want to think when we have these unreachable goals, what is dependent on that? So when we strive for 5 nines, your ISP might not, or your device might not. So that's one of the things that they talk about with extreme reliability. You also need to think about the other systems that yours is dependent on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we talk about how chaos engineering comes into play with this, so chaos engineering, who is familiar with chaos engineering?
Oh, good.
All right, great. So chaos engineering is intentionally injecting failure into a system to identify weaknesses, things that maybe we didn't know about. And when people say they're not practicing chaos engineering, you probably are. They're just poorly designed experiments, because that's what we're doing. We're experimenting on our systems because we want to fix these problems or find issues before our customers find them, before our customer cannot buy their Lego DeLorean. Look, this was a really cool Lego, okay? So it was very important, but we're thinking through that customer experience, because when we talk about our customers and reliability, we do not want to find out the issues from them first. We don't want to find out an issue from Twitter before we know that our systems are having problems. So how can we learn about our systems? And so when we talk about chaos engineering, the whole goal is to not stress out our engineers. It's not to catch somebody off guard, to say like, oh, Michael, you weren't answering your phone when that alert went off. Chaos engineering is about building a culture where we work to improve the resiliency of our systems, where we work to understand our SLOs and know our systems. Chaos engineering, really what we're saying to our system is, Does this work the way we think it does? Does the things that we assume about our systems, about our dependencies, is it going to work? Or where are the potential errors? And so again, it goes back to that user experience.
Yeah, we're intentionally poking things in a way that exercises the things that our customers care about. So how do we know what our customers care about? We got to start somewhere. We got to figure out what they want and what they're expecting out of your services. So you can start there. So maybe you know your customers really well. Maybe you're about to launch a brand new service and you're not really sure what folks are going to like about it. I've worked in, places where we had an old system and really didn't actually know what customers cared about. And then you actually talk to the users and they're like, oh, we really love this thing over here in the corner. And we're like, we were going to shut that off. We had no idea you guys liked that. So talking to your customers and figuring out, hopefully your product teams do a bit of that, right? Do a bit of user research and talk to users about what they're expecting, what they like about your product so that there's no surprises, right? But also so that you can get some priority, right? We're not going through the whole exercise just because it sounds cool, right? We want to improve customer engagement. We want to improve customer retention. If you work in retail, you've probably heard that if the page doesn't load in X amount of time, people abandon shopping carts or they go to find things somewhere else. So there's a lot of research that's been done in that part of the field already. So you may want to do more of your own research to figure out, oh, you know what? People really love this thing over here. So we're going to put some work on making that thing faster, making that thing load quicker for the users that we have so that they have a more enjoyable experience with this product that we've built. So we can then focus on all kinds of different things that our users might care about. Looking deep into the user telemetry. Do we have more users on mobile? Should we be doing more work to improve their experience? Are they looking for a particular module? Are they revisiting, some other component that we want to make sure we load first? You can see this in action in a lot of different places. One that I pick up a lot on is YouTube, right? So if you're on a slightly shaky connection for YouTube, my mom lives in the middle of nowhere, so she's on DSL, and things take forever to load. It's like you'd spin the crank and off it goes. And so the first thing that loads up is the actual video player. And then all the other parts come in next because they know the part you care about is the video player. And my experience is derived from that video player loading when I expect it to. The other stuff can come in whenever it loads. The recommended next videos or no one wants to read the comments anyway, so who cares? But all the stuff that the user actually cares about, we load first. And looking at how our users react to maybe some A/B testing, maybe some extra flex on the product itself. Maybe you actually do some user research, talk to people, then you get to figure out what they actually love about your product. And you can concentrate on improving the things that they love. And then we turn those into metrics. Who loves metrics? Who loves monitoring? Are the Datadog guys in the room, right? We know we collect a bunch of stuff that may not really relate to user experience, like CPU utilization, maybe downstream. You take the second derivative and you can figure something out with that. Or the memory utilization or those kinds of system level metrics. Alex Hidalgo goes off on the load average, that has no bearing on absolutely anything. It's always been made up garbage anyhow. So they're not metrics that relate directly to user experience. So you want to maybe augment your metrics package to capture the things that users care about, whether it's payload size or page load time or anything else that might be available that builds into that better experience. And part of it is you're still going to have metrics that are for you, right? The metrics that matter to the SREs and the folks who are managing the systems, but they're not always the best indicators of what the user is seeing. They might be leading indicators. You might see a thing go wobbly, and then sometime later the user experience decreases. I love a tabletop, right? Oh, look at it, it's perfect. It's a straight line. Yeah, it's because you've maxed out something and you're out of space there. But you can back that off and look for the things that the users are actually going to experience.
Yeah, because oftentimes we look at things and we really think that it's important to the user. We really do, but it isn't. And I mean, who here has built a feature that the customers just didn't use or didn't like? Anybody? And like, I know that our first instinct is to like stick by that, no, they're gonna like it.
The users are wrong.
They are wrong. But we want to think about when we're measuring that user experience, what are we looking at? So for example, when practicing chaos engineering, Netflix, they famously look at stream starts per second. So when they're poking holes in their product, and when you go to Netflix and you go, who's gotten the can't load this title right now, retry?
Yes.
And then you retry, and then it loads. So they're looking at that when they're designing their experiments. And that's also how they decide how big their experiment is going to be. How big is the blast radius? Because when we are experimenting on our systems, we do not want to ruin our customer's day. Because we have to remember that there is somebody on the other side trying to get something done. And that's what we talk about with our user experience, with making sure that metrics, that we have them and they matter. And there are a few people that didn't raise their hand when we talked about metrics. And it's okay if you don't have metrics to start out with. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So just pick something, gather some baseline data, and then you can move from there. And then we can use those metrics and that baseline data to really understand, do our SLOs that we've set, do they make sense? Do they make sense for us? Do they make sense ultimately for that user experience? And also, do we even know when something breaks? Do we have appropriate alerting, or are we learning about it from Twitter? Like, has anybody ever been here where they've learned about one of their services breaking from the news or from...
Right?
Yeah.
External validation. Yeah.
And that's going to happen. But once we know that, we can also go back, and once we fix the problem, when we go back into our postmortem and we've resolved it, then practice chaos engineering. Start practicing making sure that these problems don't show up again, maybe in a different way, or validate your monitoring, validate your systems. Because we are injecting these failures to understand everything. Have we set the right metrics? Have we set the right objectives? Have ultimately that can translate to the lawyers, have we set the right expectations for our customers to have back from us? And so again, the biggest thing I want you to get out of this is with chaos engineering and we're injecting failure, we're not trying to ruin somebody's day. We're trying to validate some of the things that we've set. And it's okay to go back and adjust your SLOs. It's okay to go back and say, you know what? We were wrong. Or maybe this doesn't make sense for us, or it doesn't make sense for our customer.
Yeah, so we'll talk about, I'm going to hand wave some of the math, right? Because this isn't a math show, and there's plenty of resources online, but we'll talk about a little bit, how you create these and what they actually then look like in practice. So my service level indicator is the SLI there, and then I multiply it by the objective, and then I pick some time T. And I love the time T because it can be completely arbitrary, right? You pick the thing that makes the most sense for your team, right? If you're doing a 2-week sprint and you're going to put out large features every couple of weeks, maybe your time T is 2 weeks, right? You can adjust these, and there's a lot of different research and math that you can look up and figure out what works best for you. So your SLI is going to be the number of good things that happen over the number of sort of total things that happen, and then you make it into a percentage. So if you click to the next one, I have nice round numbers for everyone, right? I love round numbers. The yellow line there, I've got 100,000 valid events, whether that's a request or a query or whatever, visit, whatever it is. I have 100,000 of those. And if I have 99,000 good ones, that means I'm at 99% good stuff, right? So then my error budget is 1% of that's what's left over. So I then have a potential 1,000 events that can be a little bit outside the range of what I would normally want them to be, and things are still going to be okay. That's not going to get to the point where a lot of users are noticing, because we live on the internet. Sometimes you push that button and things are squirrels are in the way, or something's not right, and you push it again. And that's okay. And so we get to the point where we can set our goal, base it on how many events we expect to get, and then we kind of have an idea of what's left over. That is okay, which means too then, when I get to the point where I'm alerting off of these, and a lot of your tools will do this for you now, which is great. I don't necessarily, and I work for PagerDuty, so we love to wake you all up, but like, we don't have to, right? If you are at a point where you haven't met that 1,000 threshold, I don't have to wake you up, right? It's still okay. We're still within the tolerance of what the user experience is going to be okay, right? So you can get to the point where you are only alerting when you're starting to exhaust those error budgets. And you can be a lot smarter about what you're responding to in sort of an emergency situation versus what's just kind of our steady state and we know it will be okay in a few minutes or a few more requests down the roads. So we have our 3 components. You have your indicators, which are the metrics that you've chosen. You have your objectives, which are your goals internally for yourselves. And then you have that time period where you kind of like erase it and get a new one out of the bucket of imaginary time, right? And then, as Julie mentioned earlier, like, you can reevaluate these. These aren't a contractual obligation. Remember, the lawyer part is completely different. These are your promise internally with your team. So you can say, you know what? These aren't working for us anymore. So we're going to change them. We can't meet these and meet the other requirements that we have, or we've lost some folks on the team, so we need to let some things slide right now. You can make those kinds of business and socio-technical decisions and adjust, right? Because the lawyers aren't involved here. You don't have to make any promises to contractual obligations.
So now we've talked a lot about SLOs and error budgets. So let's go a little bit back to chaos engineering. Remember, as I said, we're not just randomly taking out our system. We have a hypothesis. We think that if we do X, our system is going to respond this way, or our system is going to be resilient. Once we come up with that hypothesis, then we run an experiment. But we do not run our experiments against 100% of production.
Why not?
I mean, because it could be fun. And if you, I guess, have a huge error budget, then
go for it.
Right? But when we talk about running our experiments, we are potentially breaking things. So we want to consider the blast radius. We start small. So maybe we start against 5% of production and 10% of production. We keep expanding our blast radius until we really understand our systems while ideally not impacting our customers. And if it does impact our customers, impacting them as little as possible.
Yeah, we're running out of time. So.
Okay. Well, fine. So we run our experiments, we verify the results, we improve our system, and then we keep running them. So we've talked again about SLOs. We do want to focus on those. If we are breaching our SLOs, that may not be the right time to run your chaos engineering experiments, but you still need to plan for that in the future so that you can make your systems more resilient. So you can get started anywhere. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have metrics, that's okay. Just pick something and start with it. Or just pick an experiment that you think will have a very little, little impact on your customers. You can start anywhere. And then you can also use chaos engineering to validate your dependencies. So what happens if I, block network access to one of my dependent systems? Am I going to fail over? You want to think through all of those as you're rolling through your chaos engineering experiments.
Yep. And this is hard too, because the math gets really complicated. Like if I am in the middle layer somewhere, I'm dependent on everybody else's SLOs internally, right? So if the folks behind me are only delivering 95%, I have to do a lot of work to get better than that. So that could be pretty difficult. Let's skip over this because we are actually out of time. We'll close up with the life cycle here. So as Julie has mentioned, this is all sort of an endless learning process, right? And it helps you learn from end to end. One of the things you can do while you're practicing your chaos engineering is also practice your incident response. Think about how you're going to mobilize folks when there's a real problem, right? So you black hole a dependency, what happens? Do your alerts fire? Do the right people get paged? Can the people who get paged start a Zoom call so that everybody can get on and start talking about what's going on? So you can actually do that to exercise all of your team flows from end to end. in the event that something happens in reality, right? So you can use that as part of your entire practice. So your SLIs are there to mobilize you and motivate you towards user experience. They are a promise within your team to your business partners, to yourselves, to your operations folks, to whomever's involved about how you want to deliver experience to your users. They are not your contractual obligations to the customer. Your error budgets then tell you where to stand and give you an idea of like what you can prioritize later. If you've used up your error budget, you can't do anything weird for a while, right? Like you got to behave until things get better. So thank you. We have some resources for you. We gave a short version of this talk at SLOconf earlier this year, and there's a whole lot of really amazing talks at the SLOconf website. So lots of things there, a lot of math. If you're really into the math stuff, totally check those out. And PagerDuty has a raffle going on, so if you want to click our QR code, you can give that a shot.
And we have just recently launched a collective on Stack Overflow where you can find all AWS-related tags and questions and articles. So feel free to scan that. You can join, or you can just go to stackoverflow.com/collectives/AWS. And also, here is a link to our Resilience Hub if you're interested in learning more about resiliency. So definitely check that out. And then finally, the important thing, I got the Lego finally. I actually had to go to Amsterdam, bring it back to the United States, but it really is amazing. So thank you all.